The story begins in a town overwhelmed by chaos, as the residents realize they are outmatched and cannot fight back. A companion wearing a witch hat asks Adele for permission to transform their enemies, to which he casually agrees while radiating a dark, commanding energy. Another ally smiles in amusement while he reflects on his ambition to make everyone, even villains, serve him. The narrative then shifts back several years to reveal how this situation began. As the son of the lord ruling over Redlick, Adele is expected to become well-versed in the geography of his territory and the surrounding nations. While studying a map, he easily identifies the kingdom of Ardels, as well as the territories of Margrave Rydlick and Count Major. A sudden realization strikes him. He knows these locations perfectly despite never seeing a map before. He recognizes that these regions belong to Ardel's Miracle, a video game from his previous life, confirming that he has reincarnated into its world. Catching his reflection in a window, he notices his appearance does not match the game's protagonist. He searches his memory and realizes that his current identity does not exist in the original storyline as either an ally or an enemy. However, he recalls that his territory is mentioned midway through the game as a frontier region entirely destroyed by an antagonist. Disappointment washes over him as he understands his status is even lower than a background character. Lacking any special cheat abilities or blessings, he faces a grim future where his family and people are destined to perish. Overcoming his despair, he clenches his fist with newfound determination. He resolves to use his extensive knowledge of the game to prevent his home from falling into ruin. After calming down and reviewing the historical texts, he calculates that the main events of the game will begin in exactly 9 years. Realizing the tight deadline, he prepares to work tirelessly to secure his territory's survival. Adele studies his map and realizes his family's territory is entirely surrounded by lands ruled by incredibly powerful future villains. To the west resides a witch of calamity whose strength rivals a final boss. He panics upon remembering that to the south lies the daughter of Margrave Raedlich, a notoriously cruel antagonist. To the east lies yet another threat, leaving him completely encircled by top-tier enemies. He despairs over how an insignificant noble like himself could possibly survive such overwhelming odds. In the original game's lore, one of these neighboring threats eventually destroys his homeland, but the specific culprit was never revealed. With only 9 years until the main events begin, he feels completely trapped. However, this timeline also means the future threats are currently just children. Seeing an opportunity, he travels north toward the Land of Death, approaching a solitary wooden house. He knocks on the door, recalling that a crucial figure who can help him avoid his doomed fate lives here. Suddenly, someone slips behind him and presses a weapon to his back, issuing a stern warning. Startled by the stealthy ambush, he quickly apologizes. A weak voice calls out from inside the cabin, asking the attacker, Cian, if anything is wrong. He recognizes the boy holding him captive. Cian is destined to become one of the strongest and most ruthless figures in the game, eventually earning the title of the Demonic Lion. Driven to darkness by a tragic past, this boy will one day bring ruin to countless nations. Knowing the plot, the young lord realizes the massive risk of seeking him out is entirely worth it. His ultimate survival strategy relies on the fact that all the future antagonists are currently vulnerable youths. If he can win them over now, he can not only erase his inevitable demise, but also turn these powerful figures into his loyal allies. Instead of trying to defeat them, he plans to recruit them to protect his territory. As severe coughing echoes from within the cabin, he seizes the moment and rushes inside before his captor can stop him. A frail woman resting on a bed warmly asks if the sudden visitor is her son's friend, while the frustrated boy angrily demands to know why he entered. Adele notices the pointed ears on both Cian and the ailing woman, confirming they are hiding their demon heritage to avoid human persecution. He recalls from the game that their dilapidated home is eventually discovered, forcing them to flee. Furthermore, he remembers that her tragic passing from an illness is the catalyst that ultimately drives Cian to seek vengeance and bring ruin to the realm. Realizing her survival is the key to winning the future threat over, he formally introduces himself as the legitimate heir to the Redlick territory. She introduces herself as Mercia, apologizing for her worsening condition, despite trying various medicines and therapies. He confidently interrupts, declaring that he can cure her supposedly incurable illness. When Cian angrily dismisses the claim as nonsense, Adele wagers his own life, volunteering to face the ultimate penalty if his methods fail. The trio relocates to a dungeon in the northern forest. Cian complains about bringing her to such a dangerous place, prompting Mercia to gently scold him for disrespecting a noble. Brushing off the hostility, Adele asks her to cast a beginner-level water spell. Cian furiously protests, arguing that she lacks the energy for magic, but he insists that her condition is exactly why she needs to do it. Frustrated, Cian attempts to take her home, feeling foolish for trusting a human. However, he is stopped when Adele challenges his resolve, pointing out that he is putting his own life on the line for this test. Wanting to place her faith in him, Mercia agrees to attempt the simple spell. He encourages her to launch it with all her might. To everyone's shock, a massive torrent of water erupts through the dungeon. Cian is completely bewildered by the sheer power of a basic spell and demands to know what happened. Adele explains that the massive magical output is directly tied to her illness. At that moment, Mercia stands on her own 2 feet, her voice filled with relief as she marvels at how light her body feels after releasing the magic. Overcome with emotion, Cian begins to cry upon seeing her recovered strength, just before she suddenly loses her footing and slips. As Mercia slips, she accidentally pulls Adele down with her. She quickly apologizes, explaining that it has been a long time since she stood on her own. Brushing off the fall, he warmly reassures her. Overcome with emotion, she tearfully expresses her deep gratitude. Having believed her mysterious condition would eventually claim her life, she never imagined standing again. He offers a humble smile, internally relieved that his reliance on his former life's game knowledge actually worked. Still processing the miraculous recovery, Cian hesitantly asks how a simple spell could cure such a severe condition. Adele explains that she was suffering from a rare ailment known as mana illness. He clarifies that the disease causes the body to produce more magic than it can handle, effectively poisoning the host from the inside out. Releasing that pent-up energy was the only way to save her. Realizing the magnitude of what Adele has done, Cian drops to his knees and begs for forgiveness. He admits that the immense suffering his kind faces at the hands of humans made him deeply untrusting. However, witnessing a human risk his own life to save a demon completely shatters his prejudice. Overwhelmed with gratitude, he formally pledges his eternal loyalty. Shocked but pleased, Adele warmly accepts the vow. A few days later, Mercia and Cian are safely employed at the family mansion. Cian brings tea to Adele and confirms that she is practicing water spells in the dungeon to manage her condition exactly as instructed. Cian continues to marvel at Adele's extensive wisdom, praising him not only for his brilliant medical insight, but also for his willingness to harbor demons without prejudice. Adele modestly downplays the praise, keeping the secret of his gaming knowledge to himself. As Cian vows to spend the rest of his life repaying the massive debt, Adele smiles to himself. He rejoices internally, knowing he has successfully erased the timeline where this formidable opponent brings about his demise. With one massive threat converted into a dedicated ally, he immediately sets his sights on his next target, the silent witch residing in the western forest. 3 months pass after Adele hires the pair. Cian dedicates his spare time to rigorously training his swordsmanship, while Mercia takes charge of the mansion's kitchen. Her cooking is incredibly delicious, quickly becoming something the young lord looks forward to every day. While enjoying one of her meals, he asks if she plans to visit the dungeon today for her mana illness treatment. She confirms, prompting him to tag along so he can secretly begin his next major plan. Thrilled by the idea, she excitedly prepares a massive lunchbox. The dungeon in the northern forest holds a massive secret. In its deepest depths lies Siana, a silent magic user whose unsealing grants immense power. Her mana pool is vast enough to bring unparalleled destruction to the world. In the original game lore, she falls into a trap that makes her despise humanity, eventually turning her into a notorious calamity. With 9 years left before the main plot begins, he intends to reach the bottom floor and lift the seal before anyone else can. Arriving at the dungeon, Cian complains that the massive lunchbox is entirely overkill. Noting her laid-back attitude, Adele decides to keep his true ambitions to himself for now, feeling safe since monsters do not spawn on this upper level. When Cian realizes they are at a dungeon, he becomes eager to dive deeper, wanting to show off the results of his intense training. Mercia gently explains his excitement, realizing the outing is not just a casual picnic. Recognizing his guard's eagerness, Adele praises his daily dedication and assures him that he looks forward to seeing his progress in due time. This brightens Kian's mood, easing his impatience. Inwardly, he breathes a sigh of relief, remembering that this specific dungeon requires a high level to clear in the game. Knowing his ally would be in serious danger, he is thankful they are avoiding the lower floors. With the situation settled, Mersha asks for permission to begin her magical treatment, and he happily gives her the go-ahead as she starts casting her spell. Adele reflects on his timeline, relieved to intervene before the silent magic user can be corrupted by villains. Knowing her in-game reputation as a glamorous and stunningly beautiful character, he excitedly fantasizes about his heroic rescue. He playfully imagines her as a mature, grateful mentor who will shower him with endless praise and luxurious rewards for unsealing her. His daydream is abruptly shattered by a furious voice, demanding to know why they are trespassing in her dwelling. Adele is shocked to see the imposing, adult form of Siana appearing out of nowhere on an upper floor. Panic sets in as he wonders if someone has already freed and manipulated her into despising humanity. She fiercely accuses the trio of causing a massive nuisance. When Mersha expresses confusion, the enraged magic user begins charging a massive fireball to demonstrate exactly how angry she is. Recognizing that her power rivals that of a final boss, Adele quickly strategizes. He knows her devastating attacks take a long time to fully charge, so he orders Mersha to quickly launch a beginner-level water spell to interrupt the cast. She unleashes a rapid water blast, successfully neutralizing the gathering fire and filling the cavern with thick fog. He urges his allies to use the distraction to retreat, but a childish voice suddenly complains about being completely drenched. As the fog clears, the towering woman is gone, replaced by a dripping, wet little girl. She introduces herself as the true Siana, casually explaining that the mature woman they saw was simply an illusion. Still holding on to a shred of hope, he asks if she will eventually grow into that glamorous adult form. When she bluntly confirms that this tiny stature is her permanent appearance for life, he collapses in comedic despair, realizing his grand fantasies were entirely misplaced. With his glamorous fantasy entirely shattered, Adele listens as Siana angrily explains her predicament. When Mersha questions what they did wrong, Siana reveals that their daily water spells have been pooling and trickling down through the dungeon floors. Even though they only cast magic on the upper level, the sheer volume of water eventually flooded her sealed chamber at the very bottom. She complains that she nearly drowned in her sleep, unintentionally breaking her powerful seal in the strangest way possible. After barely escaping the flood and dragging herself to the upper floor, she is furious that they had the nerve to drench her yet again. Demanding to know how they plan to make amends, she begins charging another massive burst of fire. Fearing his doomed fate has finally arrived, Adele panics as Mersha bravely steps in front of him. She frantically apologizes, explaining that the daily magic was strictly a medical treatment and that they held no ill will. Bowing deeply, she begs Siana to direct all the punishment solely at her and spare her companions. Realizing an honest apology is the best route, Adele quickly drops to his knees. He takes full responsibility, admitting he was the one who ordered the spells. Following their lead, Kian also bows to apologize for his prior hostility. Seeing their genuine remorse, Siana finally extinguishes her flames. Relieved that she is willing to forgive them, Adele hastily offers to grant any request within their power to make up for the trouble. Her face immediately breaks into a wide, devious smile. He instantly regrets his open-ended promise, terrified that she might demand the ultimate price. However, to the utter shock of the trio, she simply announces that she is famished and demands they treat her to a massive feast. Stunned by the harmless request, he realizes she is coming home with them. Arriving at the massive estate, Siana marvels at the sheer size of the mansion and immediately demands the promised feast. Adele remains incredibly tense, acutely aware that he must keep his guard up around a threat whose power rivals a final boss. He knows that a single wrong move could result in an immediate disaster. Stepping inside, she compliments the pristine interior, which he attributes to Mersha and the diligent maidstaff. Noting his obvious wealth and high status, Siana sharply reminds him that his noble birth does not excuse flooding her room. She firmly insists he still owes her a massive debt. Hoping to use his hospitality to score some goodwill and make her forget the water incident, he realizes winning her over will be an uphill battle. Suddenly, Balin, the head butler and Cian's superior, arrives to welcome them home. Adele introduces the veteran servant and asks him to entertain their highly important guest while the food is prepared. Misinterpreting the phrase important guest as a secret romantic interest, Balin gets a mischievous idea. Completely oblivious to the misunderstanding, the young lord feels confident that combining the butler's decades of experience with the upcoming meal will perfectly satisfy the magic user. After 30 minutes of sitting in the dining room, Siana begins to loudly complain about the delay. Balin finally returns, warmly apologizing for the wait, and presents her with a stunning bouquet of roses. To Adele's absolute horror, the butler smoothly claims that his young master specifically requested the flowers, stating that pretty blooms suit a lovely lady perfectly. The butler proudly beams at his own matchmaking skills, leaving his master completely dumbfounded by the intricate and entirely fabricated romantic gesture. Completely baffled by Balin's romantic gesture, Adele watches helplessly as Siana dismisses the strange behavior and impatiently demands her meal. She warns that there will be severe consequences if the food is not up to par. Mersha arrives with a specially made meat pie. Initially unimpressed and expecting something much more lavish, Siana takes a reluctant bite. Her demeanor instantly shifts as she marvels at the warm, soft texture and rich flavor. Seeing her genuine delight over a simple dish, Adele realizes that despite her incredibly long life, she has likely never experienced proper care or a decent meal. After finishing her food, she stretches happily, entirely stuffed. Relieved that the hosting plan is working flawlessly, he wonders how else he can keep her entertained and build more goodwill. Seizing the opportunity, Mersha suggests a relaxing soak in the estate's massive bathhouse to wash away her exhaustion, offering to join her. He pulls Mersha aside, nervously questioning if it is safe for her to be alone with such a powerful entity. She warmly reassures him, expressing her belief that Siana is not truly dangerous. Arriving at the enormous bathhouse, Siana excitedly runs toward the water, amazed by the sheer size and exclaiming that it is big enough to swim in. Catching herself showing too much enthusiasm, she quickly puts her guard back up, warning her companion not to try any funny business, or she will scorch her. Unfazed by the empty threat, Mersha smiles and mentions that Adele generously allows all the servants to use these luxurious facilities. As they settle into the warm water, she offers another sincere apology for the flooding incident. She expresses her sympathy, stating she never imagined someone so young would be living in such a dangerous dungeon. Instantly defensive, Siana proudly declares that she is not a child at all, but rather a formidable mage who has lived for over 1,000 years. Siana insists she is far older and demands not to be treated by human standards. Unbothered, Mersha warmly replies that she simply looks like an adorable child, around her own son's age. Flustered, Siana reminds her of the devastating spell she cast earlier, questioning how anyone could speak so casually to her. Brushing off the intimidation, Mersha admits she has always imagined how nice it would be to have a daughter to care for, expressing genuine joy at spending time together. Shocked and embarrassed by the motherly affection, Siana abruptly stands up to protest, but loses her footing and hilariously slips under the water. Later, a tearful Mersha repeatedly apologizes to Adele for the mishap. He kindly reassures her while checking on the unconscious guest resting on the sofa. Confirming she is unhurt, he instructs Mersha to help Balin prepare a guest bedroom. Still playing the matchmaker, Balin mischievously asks if he should prepare a room for the two of them to share, prompting an exasperated Adele to quickly shoo him away. Left alone, he panics, terrified that she might wake up in a foul mood and destroy the estate. He gently wakes her up, explaining the slip in the bathhouse. As her memory returns, she groggily sits up and asks about his missing parents. He explains that his mother and father lack authority compared to other lords, so they spend most of their time working in other territories instead of hosting guests. He affectionately adds that he views his loyal servants as his true family. Surprised, she wonders how people of different races and bloodlines can share such a deep bond. He thoughtfully replies that true family is defined by mutual care and feelings rather than strict blood relations. Her quiet reflection on his words is interrupted when Balin returns to announce that the guest room is ready. Adele stands to take his leave, but she suddenly grabs his sleeve, asking him to stay by her side a little longer to talk. Shortly after, he sits nervously in her bedroom, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. He sweats profusely, wondering if this late-night chat will somehow trigger her wrath and lead to his sudden demise. His fearful internal monologue is cut short when she softly calls out to him. In the quiet of the bedroom, Siana asks Adele about Mersha's condition. He explains the mechanics of the mana illness, detailing how the body stores an excess of magical energy that must be regularly released to prevent severe internal poisoning. Finally understanding the necessity of the daily water spells, she grows thoughtful. He silently wonders what prompted her sudden curiosity, guessing that they must have shared a deep conversation in the bathhouse. Opening up to him, she confides that her existence in the dungeon felt programmed. She instinctively knew her sole purpose was to grant power to whoever unsealed her, and because past individuals only feared her immense strength, experiencing mundane activities like sharing meals and bathing was completely unimaginable. She admits that being treated with genuine motherly affection was a first in her 1,000 years of existence, leaving her deeply confused about her own emotions. He empathizes with her centuries of agonizing solitude and the tragedy of being viewed strictly as a dangerous tool. When a soft, sympathetic chuckle escapes him, she defensively demands to know if he is mocking her. He quickly apologizes, warmly admitting that he simply found her vulnerability endearing. Brushing past her embarrassment, he asks how the motherly treatment truly made her feel. When she stubbornly argues that her monstrous nature forbids such comforting emotions, he gently reassures her that only she can define her feelings. He encourages her to be honest and share her happiness with Mersha the next morning. Pondering his comforting words, she eventually drifts off to sleep. Intending to stay awake all night to ensure the estate's safety, he accidentally falls asleep as well. He wakes up in a sheer panic the next morning to find her side of the room empty. Terrified that a disaster has occurred in his absence, he frantically sprints through the mansion to the dining hall. To his absolute relief, he discovers Siana and Mersha peacefully enjoying breakfast together, with Kian standing nearby. Mersha warmly greets the young lord, affectionately explaining that their guest personally invited her to share a morning meal. Seeing the peaceful scene, Adele realizes she took his heartfelt advice to heart. Kian questions Adele's judgment, expressing deep concern over allowing such a dangerous individual to make her own decisions. His protective complaint immediately prompts a heated, back-and-forth argument between him and Siana. Watching the two of them bicker, Adele wonders to himself if he has truly succeeded in winning her over, or if his challenges have only just begun. Enjoying a quiet cup of tea while gazing out the window, Adele reflects on his newfound peace. With his biggest concerns, Kian and Siana now serving as his loyal comrades, he anticipates a long period of tranquility, perfectly aligned with the game's original timeline. His peaceful moment is abruptly shattered when she marches in and demands he accompany her to the deepest floor of the dungeon. Since the floodwaters have finally receded, she insists on venturing down to retrieve her personal belongings. He immediately refuses the dangerous request, prompting her to tease him for being a spoiled child and point out his frequent trips to the upper floors. He argues that his previous visits were strictly confined to the safe, monster-free zones. When she confidently promises to protect him, he vehemently explains just how exceptionally weak he truly is. Recalling his reincarnation, he remembers checking his stats and discovering his magic points are entirely empty. Despite having an aptitude for all magic types, his abysmal growth rate means learning even a basic spell would take him years of grueling effort. He frankly admits that a minor noble like himself would easily perish against even the weakest monsters in the lower levels. Amused by his willingness to proudly belittle himself, she refuses to take no for an answer. She mentions that she originally asked the others for help, but everyone suspiciously claimed to be busy. At that exact moment, he spots Balin peeking through the doorway, giving him a cheeky wink. Realizing the matchmaking butler intentionally orchestrated this outing, he silently curses the setup. Ignoring his dramatic protests about his impending doom, she physically drags him away, declaring she simply needs someone to carry her luggage. They eventually arrive at the second underground floor of the Northern Forest dungeon, with him nervously hauling her bags. To his absolute surprise, the area is completely devoid of enemies. She smugly reminds him that there was nothing to worry about, revealing that Mersha's massive daily water spells had entirely washed away all the monsters. Realizing his stubborn refusal was completely unnecessary, He breathes a heavy sigh of relief. Siana explains that the dungeon's monsters will eventually respawn by feeding on the ambient magical energy. Arriving at her completely ruined chamber, she playfully teases Adele about the destruction, prompting him to defensively remind her that he has already apologized. They begin sifting through the wreckage, discovering that while her books are beyond saving, the clothes safely tucked inside her closet survived the flood. Noticing him inspecting one of her many magical staffs, she explains that the specific weapon enhances water attributes. It allows anyone with a basic aptitude to cast beginner-level spells, regardless of their current abilities. Realizing his magic points are completely empty but his natural aptitude is high, he eagerly wonders if the weapon will bypass his limits. Meanwhile, she changes into a beautifully preserved dress and steps out to ask for his opinion. Completely oblivious to her new outfit, he enthusiastically tests the weapon, accidentally launching a water bullet directly at her. Ecstatic that he can finally cast a spell without undergoing years of grueling training, he completely ignores her thoroughly soaked, annoyed state and eagerly begs to keep the staff. Flustered by his intense enthusiasm and oblivious praise, she reluctantly agrees and even points out a nearby ring that boosts healing magic. Grateful for the incredible items, he internally rejoices, realizing these tools might be the key to leveling up quickly and leaving his status as a weak noble behind. A few weeks later, the pair stands in the dungeon overlooking a completely flooded second floor. He executes a brilliant new strategy. Inspired by Mersha's earlier accident that wiped out all the enemies, he deliberately submerged the floor to mass defeat the monsters. Impressed by the unorthodox tactic, Siana watches as he easily gathers a massive amount of experience points. Satisfied with his current magical progress, Adele decides to wrap up for the day. He realizes that by having Siana continuously revive the defeated monsters in the flooded room, he can endlessly farm experience points without taking any damage. She praises his remarkable creativity and incredible determination. He humbly credits her for the help, though she quickly dismisses the compliment, warning him that flattery will get him nowhere. Their conversation is interrupted when a completely drenched wolf monster bursts through the barrier. Surprised by the breach, he questions how it escaped. She admits her barrier might have been too weak, noting the creature's desperate strength when cornered. As she extends her hand to eliminate the threat, he stops her, determined to face it alone. She reminds him of his earlier complaints about his abysmal stats, but he tightly grips his staff, confident in his recent growth. He points the weapon and casts a water bullet. The spell strikes the wolf directly, taking the monster down in an instant. Initially frozen in shock, he soon erupts into loud cheers, celebrating his newfound strength. He excitedly thanks her, thrilled that his magical points have finally increased from 0 to 1. She playfully rolls her eyes, amused that he is making such a massive fuss over a minor victory. Overjoyed by his progress, he feels hopeful that he might actually stand a chance against the future threats destined to bring about his downfall. However, his good mood vanishes the moment they return to the mansion. Kian rushes out to greet them, apologizing for the sudden news, but announcing that a guest from a neighboring territory has arrived. Hearing the word neighboring, Adele instantly panics. Kian explains that Balin is currently stalling the visitor, who firmly insists on paying her respects to the young lord. Terrified, he realizes that every single surrounding territory is ruled by a future antagonist. He stresses over the timeline, realizing this dangerous encounter is happening far earlier than it should in the game's plot. Before he can even ask for the guest's name, a newcomer smoothly steps into the room, politely introducing herself as Freya Rascart. Adele's eyes widen in absolute horror. He immediately recognizes her true identity from the game. She is destined to become the explosive Saint Freya, an infamous character notorious for bringing ruin to countless towns in her wake. Staring at the new arrival, Adele internally panics, wondering why the explosive saint is paying him a visit so early when she is not supposed to appear until midway through the story. He recalls her lore. While saint is an official title bestowed by the cathedral, her explosive moniker was given by the player base because she eventually obliterates entire cities and triggers massive disaster events. He terrifyingly realizes that his successful efforts to befriend Kian and Siana might have caused the game's timeline to forcibly correct itself, sending a new threat to ensure his territory falls to ruin. Freya formally greets the young lord, expressing her honor at finally meeting him. He politely returns the pleasantries just as Balin steps in to announce that the guest room has been prepared. Realizing he cannot simply turn her away without risking a catastrophe, he resolves to stay on high alert, hoping to entertain her just enough so she leaves the mansion as quickly as possible. As they sit down, she thanks him for his generous hospitality despite the incredibly short notice. Mersha promptly serves them tea. Observing the polite guest, he struggles to understand how someone who looks so remarkably normal and innocent will eventually snap and annihilate entire regions. He nervously wonders if she is hiding a violent, destructive urge right behind her sweet smile. To make matters infinitely worse, Siana is lounging in the room with them, casually demanding that Mersha add extra milk and sugar to her tea. He breaks into a cold sweat, knowing that his resident magic user's highly entitled attitude is incredibly likely to rub the saint the wrong way. If a clash between these two future antagonists breaks out in his living room, his entire domain will be wiped off the map. He desperately prays that the new guest has an incredibly long fuse. Trying to control the situation, he asks what brings her to his territory. She claims she was nearby for official cathedral duties and simply wanted to pay her respects. He highly doubts the excuse, noting that she has never bothered to visit before and showed up completely unannounced. Suddenly, Siana rudely interrupts to ask if the guest brought any delicious food as a gift, claiming it is customary in the human realm. Flustered, Freya apologizes for arriving empty-handed due to a rush. He frantically tries to cover for the magic user's bluntness, but she completely ignores him, stubbornly complaining that she wants sweets. Freya warmly offers to share some sweets she received earlier that day. Excited by the treat, Siana carelessly lunges forward. Adele frantically reaches out to stop her but loses his balance, accidentally knocking the visiting saint to the floor. Horrified by his clumsiness, he scrambles backward and profusely apologizes for insulting such a venerable figure. She graciously waves off the accident, though he internally vows not to make another fatal mistake. Happily munching on a cookie, Siana bluntly asks if saints are genuinely as amazing as people claim. Terrified that the magic user is deliberately trying to provoke their volatile guest, he hastily apologizes and excuses her ignorance of worldly affairs. Unbothered, Freya patiently explains that her title is bestowed by the Cathedral, a devoted religious sect dedicated to maintaining global peace and honoring the divine creation. Relieved that she is not angry, he decides to flatter her further to stay on her good side. He praises her impressive status, mentioning how saints utilize both holy and healing magic to soothe people's pain. However, her expression suddenly falls into a deep, worried sadness. Panicking that he somehow triggered her temper, he watches closely as she quickly forces a smile, claiming she is simply traveling to deepen her knowledge as a saint in training. Noting her incredibly stiff reaction to the mention of magic, he discreetly whispers the secret order to Siana. Shortly after, Mersha returns to announce that Balin has suggested the guests stay the night since it is getting late. Desperate to avoid another day of walking on eggshells around the explosive threat, Adele politely tries to usher her out, citing her exhausting and busy schedule. His polite dismissal is completely ruined when Siana loudly boasts about the estate's massive swimmable bathhouse. Thrilled by the idea, the guest eagerly accepts the invitation. As the matchmaking butler cheekily asks if the young lord wants to spend more time with their visitor, after adamantly refusing to share a room and heading to his own quarters, Adele leaves Balan to show Freya to her guest chamber. Later, while relaxing in the estate's luxurious bathhouse, the visiting saint reflects on her dire situation. Harboring a heavy secret she is hiding from the world, she realizes she has no choice but to rely on the young lord for help. Meanwhile, Adele meets privately with Siana, asking if she successfully appraised the guest's magical status. He ordered the secret investigation because the guest's face had grown noticeably pale at the mere mention of magic earlier. Reviewing the gathered stats, he is completely baffled to find a title labeled Loved by a Wicked God. He knows the cathedral strictly worships holy deities, making the dark title entirely contradictory. Looking closer at the appraisal, he notices even more bizarre anomalies. Her light and healing magic points are sitting at absolute 0, while her dark magic level is incredibly high. This completely breaks the world's logic, as the title of saint is exclusively given to those who reach the maximum cap in holy and healing magic. Furthermore, she completely lacks any natural aptitude for fire. When he asks if dark magic can cause massive blasts, Siana denies it. However, she mentions a rare rumor. If someone with a negative magical attribute and 0 magic points attempts to forcibly cast a spell, it can trigger a catastrophic explosion. Stunned, he realizes negative attributes did not even exist in the original game's mechanics. Piecing together the Wicked God title, the lack of fire aptitude, and the 0 holy magic points, he deduces the hidden truth behind the explosive disaster events she is destined to cause. Convinced she is secretly aware of her abnormal status and deeply troubled by it, he resolves to confront her. The following day, he escorts Freya far away from the city to the deserted outskirts of the Land of Death. Confused by the isolated location, she asks why he brought her there. He gently explains that the area is completely abandoned, ensuring that whatever she confesses to him will remain an absolute secret. Touched by his perceptiveness and discretion, she finally drops her facade. She quietly admits that he is the only person she can trust and desperately begs for his help. Unbeknownst to them, Siana and Mersha are secretly listening to the private conversation from behind a nearby pillar. Unaware of the eavesdroppers, Adele asks Freya exactly how he can help her. She confesses that shortly after receiving her official title, she suddenly lost her ability to use both healing and holy magic. She admits to faking an illness to hide her powerless condition from the cathedral, while desperately trying to relearn her skills from scratch. Having nothing to show for her efforts, she heard recent rumors about his sudden magical awakening and traveled to the territory in the faint hope of finding a solution. He realizes with dread that his desperate efforts to train and avoid his own doomed fate inadvertently sparked the rumors that brought this walking disaster straight to his door. He knows his sudden ability to cast spells comes entirely from the magical items Siana gave him. He remembers the specific ring he acquired from her ruined chamber, which allows the wearer to use healing magic regardless of their base stats. He hesitates, internally dreading the thought of giving up such an incredibly rare item, knowing it will permanently cost him the ability to use healing magic himself. Noticing his hesitation, Freya desperately drops to her knees and begs for his secret, promising to do absolutely anything in return and vowing never to divulge his methods. She tearfully confesses that without her magic, she will lose her entire reason to live. Knowing that refusing her could trigger a catastrophic explosion, he takes a deep breath and agrees to help. Though he warns that her magic might not return exactly as it was before, he presents her with the rare ring, explaining that the device instantly raises the wearer's magical aptitude. She hesitates to accept such a priceless artifact, but he warmly insists that seeing her regain her abilities will make it entirely worth the sacrifice. Adele hopes this sacrifice will at least remove one doomed fate from his future. He asks Freya to hold out her hand and slides the magical ring onto her finger. He internally cringes when he realizes it perfectly fits her ring finger, unintentionally making the gesture look incredibly romantic. Flustered, she admits she has never received a ring from a man before. He assumes most people are simply too intimidated to offer jewelry to a saint. When she promises to treasure it forever, he warmly agrees, internally begging her to take good care of the priceless artifact. He explains that the ring's basic effect should immediately allow her to use healing magic again. When she points out that no one is injured to test it on, he pulls out a small blade. Horrified, she begs him to stop, and even Kian and Mersha, who are secretly watching from afar, grow deeply concerned. Ignoring the warnings, Adele creates a quick cut on his own palm. As a small amount of blood appears, he casually instructs her to cast a healing spell, assuring her that the injury means nothing because she is going to cure him. Trauma from her past failures suddenly paralyzes her. Terrified of making another mistake, she freezes. Noticing her panic, he gently places a reassuring hand on her shoulder and encourages her to have confidence. His warm touch surprisingly grounds her. Feeling an overwhelming desire to soothe his pain, she extends her hand and channels her magic. To her absolute joy, a holy light envelops his hand, perfectly closing the wound. Overcome with emotion, she bursts into tears of gratitude. She marvels at his incredible nobility, deeply moved that he sacrificed a priceless item and willingly hurt himself just to save her. In reality, Adele is internally screaming in pain and terror. Having never used a blade on himself before, he accidentally cut much deeper than intended and only grabbed her shoulder out of sheer panic when she hesitated. Despite his internal freakout, he successfully resolves her immediate crisis. While she can safely use healing magic without triggering a catastrophic explosion, the mystery of her missing aptitude remains unsolved. Furthermore, attempting holy magic might still cause a disaster, meaning his doomed fate is only delayed, not entirely destroyed. Adele explains that repeatedly casting healing spells while wearing the ring will steadily raise her magical aptitude. Taking his words completely out of context, Freya assumes he is graciously volunteering to repeatedly injure himself so she can continuously practice. Deeply moved by his supposed dedication, she excitedly vows to honor his sacrifice by training until her mana is entirely depleted, even eagerly offering to wield the blade herself to speed up the process. Horrified and internally screaming, he fails to correct her misunderstanding and is forced to endure a grueling, painful cycle of being repeatedly wounded and healed. Later, standing by her carriage, the trembling young lord bids her farewell, internally rejoicing that the torturous ordeal is finally over. Before departing, she shares a crucial clue about her missing magic. She recalls losing her abilities shortly after meeting a mysterious individual introduced by the chief priest. Suspiciously, none of the other clergy members claim to know the stranger, leaving her memory of the encounter incredibly hazy. He thanks her for the valuable information, making a mental note that the cathedral might be secretly involved in triggering his doomed fate. Relieved that her abilities are restored, he assumes she has no further reason to visit his territory, and looks forward to finally finding some peace. However, his hopes are instantly shattered when she turns around and happily asks if she can visit him again. Before he can frantically decline, Balin steps forward and cheerfully extends an open, standing invitation. Thrilled, she promises to return soon and rides away. As the matchmaking butler proudly praises his master for getting on such great terms with the saint, the traumatized Adele completely freezes. Overwhelmed by the painful memories of his grueling training, and terrified of her inevitable return, he collapses on the spot.
Here I am, know it's been a while. I was in denial about my love. Here I stand,